Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, blowing the whistle on Facebook and Instagram when it comes to Palestine.
I think my conscience doesn't allow me to sleep without trying to do something about it.
How alleged censorship at parent company Meta might be shaping our perception of the war in Gaza. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
Meta is today's modern-day town square, and it is clear that Meta is censoring Palestine.
Saima Akhtar is a former Meta employee. She was there for 3 years before being fired earlier this year. She talked to us outside of Meta's New York offices, where she's helping organize a demonstration.
Meta retains far too much unchecked power in controlling public perception by deciding what is and isn't allowed to be shared with the rest of the world, and deciding who is and isn't allowed a platform to speak to the world.
Saima says she herself experienced this censorship, especially in the months following October 7th. Anytime she or her colleagues posted about Palestine on internal platforms, the posts were deleted.
I had a colleague who, upon hearing that one of our colleagues lost 9 more members of his family in Gaza and offered condolences to him in our Muslim ERG, Employee Resource Group, and the post was taken down. When I posted about having watermelon cupcakes at the Muslim booth at our community fair, the post was taken down and I was told I cannot have watermelon cupcakes because it represents Palestine.
Saima says when she posted news articles about public concerns about the censorship of Palestine on Facebook and Instagram, those posts were also deleted.
I couldn't sleep while I was working there. It was just sleepless nights where I felt the weight and the burden of what Meta was doing on our platforms. So in December, I helped write a letter that was addressed to Meta leaders.
The letter, circulated and signed by 450 employees in a single day, called on leadership to address employee concerns, including allegations of censorship and an unsafe environment for Palestinian employees.
Meta responded by deactivating my system access, putting me under investigation for 2 months, and they deleted the letter and even went into employees' trash cans to delete any copies of the letter and never addressed our concerns.
Saima was suspended, but was eventually allowed to come back, where she continued her Palestine advocacy. She was ultimately fired in June when the company found out she'd made a copy of another document employees were working on about bias and discrimination related to Palestine at Meta. She's one of a number of current and former employees who were interviewed by my next guest for a new AJ Plus documentary called Inside Meta's Palestine Censorship.
We put these claims made by Saima and other employees to the company, and a Meta spokesperson replied saying, "Our goal is to foster a company culture around mutual respect and inclusivity where everyone can do their best work." My name is Dena Takruri. I'm a senior presenter at AJ Plus. I host the documentary show Direct From.
Well, Dena, it's really good to have you on The Take. Since October 7th, we have heard many users publicly accusing Meta of suppressing pro-Palestine content, and that is from shadow bans to blocked accounts to more. But your documentary shows that those complaints were coming from inside Meta as well. So you talked to Saima, as well as a number of other former and current Meta employees for this documentary. What did they tell you about what they saw happening?
Similar to the users that have all witnessed this shadow banning and censorship, this was something that was really pronounced inside of Meta. And I just want to point out before that, even, it's not just something that users experience in its firsthand testimony. This has been well documented by Human Rights Watch and other digital rights organizations. Human Rights Watch came out with a report in December of 2023 calling Meta's censorship of Palestine content systemic and global. So for employees within Meta, they're getting, tons of messages from people they know being like, what's happening? My posts are getting taken down. I can't go live anymore on Instagram. Like, things are being censored. Things are being shadow banned.
Instagram is taking down my stories.
That post was removed. Shadow bans.
This is censorship at its finest.
So can you give me some examples of what people were saying was happening?
Sure. Our documentary starts out with a conversation I had. It's an exclusive interview with a former software engineer at Meta who's Palestinian American. We call him Omar to protect his identity, to protect his future job prospects at his requests. One of the things that he was tasked to do by Meta in October of 2023 was to assess the quality of integrity filters as they related to Israel, Gaza, and Ukraine. So his job was to look into things. In late 2023, so in December, about 2 months or more into this genocide, he was looking into these severe issues impacting many users from Palestine whose accounts were being suppressed, whose reach was limited, who were getting censored.
A bunch of accounts were basically disappearing from search. Their content wasn't showing up in recommendations. We just got a lot of reports, both internally and externally.
And in looking into this, he stumbled upon the account of a prominent young photojournalist out of Gaza who had at that point amassed more than 17 million followers. Perhaps your audience is familiar with Mu'taz Azaiza.
On the gate of Gaza City. Behind me, there is a lot of people are evacuating Gaza City.
He found that many of his posts were being marked for containing sexual activity or nudity, which was flagged internally as pornographic. These were posts depicting the devastation in Gaza. In some cases, they were destroyed buildings. In other cases, they were images of injured or dead children. This deeply affected Omar.
Some of them were difficult to look at, but in no means pornographic. Marking images and videos of injured and dead children as pornographic, I find deeply offensive.
He followed the typical protocol that the engineers at Meta do. But as he was doing so, he noticed that others were not following that protocol. He noticed that tickets were being opened and marked mitigated, resolved, and closed with the same timestamp, indicating that people were dismissing issues without actually properly investigating them.
It struck me as very odd, unprofessional. I've never seen that in any company that I worked at.
And in addition to that, he was receiving messages outside of the chat from people saying like, hey, stop looking into this. Or, hey, stand down. Someone else is taking care of this. Omar said there were thousands of such cases when it came to Palestinian content being suppressed. What eventually happens is that Omar gets pulled into a meeting by an employment investigator, basically HR. He finds out that he's the one under investigation. And the question basically came to, do you have a personal relationship with Mu'taz Azaiza? Which he does not. He's never met the guy. He's never communicated with him. He's never messaged him. He's not from Gaza. There's no way. And at this point, Mu'taz was on the cover of magazines and stuff. He felt that was a racist question just because they're both Palestinian. He eventually complains to HR and shortly after is fired. They fired him just a few days before his stocks were due to vest, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, just before he was due to be paid out for his performance review, and he had glowing performance reviews over the years. Meta declined to comment directly on Omar's case, but previously a company spokesperson had said that Omar violated data access policies, and those are rules on how employees can use company data. The implication there was that he was looking into Mu'taz Azaiza's account and he personally knew him. But we interviewed Mu'taz and asked him point blank, do you know this guy? He said no. Have you ever talked to this guy? He said no.
They fired him just because he was doing his job. It's their way. It's a war against our existence.
So Omar was fired. As we heard earlier from Saima, she was also fired. How reflective are stories like theirs of the company's approach to dealing with those who've raised concerns within Meta about how pro-Palestine posts are dealt with, or those who've been advocating for Palestine? What did you find?
I think they're pretty reflective. There's definitely this sense among people that we spoke to that being vocal about Palestine inside the company put a target on their back. In some cases, employees are terminated, like Saima and like Omar. In other cases, they are, punished in certain ways. Like, for example, if they try to post internally about Palestine, Meta workers have this internal platform called Workplace, which you can basically think of as corporate Facebook. And the company has gotten very strict about what can and cannot be posted internally. They have a policy they unrolled in 2022, which is called CEE, that stands for Community Engagement Expectations. The goal is to stop disruptive conversations in the workplace about like vaccines, war, and abortion. But what ended up happening is that it is so over-enforced that if anyone just tried to post condolences for their colleagues who lost relatives in Gaza, the post would be taken down. If they tried to post, we were shown dozens of these posts, if they tried to post really harmless, if they tried to post innocuous things about Palestinian culture or dance or olive trees, those posts would be taken down. So not only are these posts being removed, we were told that, CEE violations could result in your performance reviews being affected and bonus payouts being affected as well adversely.
And yet, one of the points you raised earlier is that, at least with Omar and his story and what he was seeing in his actual job, he wasn't seeing that same kind of censorship with posts related to, say, the war in Ukraine, Russia's involvement, any of that.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely uncovered a glaring double standard when it comes to Meta's policies and how Meta adjusts its policies during other global events. So Meta employs something that it calls a newsworthiness allowance, which means it'll, change its policies if they deem it important to the public interest. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Meta relaxed some of its policies to make it easier for Ukrainians to post, to protect their free speech. So that even resulted in, them being allowed to call for violence against Russia or death to Vladimir Putin. And in one case, temporarily, they delisted a Ukrainian neo-Nazi group from their list of banned accounts because they were seen to be, freedom fighters fighting the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, do you think, Malika, that when it came to Palestine or let's say Hamas or the Israeli invasion of Gaza, they relaxed those policies? No.
Definitely not.
No. In fact, in some cases, they made it even harder for Palestinians to post. After October 7th, after the Hamas-led attacks on Israel, Meta cranked up its automated content filters throughout the Middle East to curb suspected hate speech. But they applied the strictest filters specifically out of Palestine. So they made it even harder for Palestinians to post.
So who was influencing Meta's policies on Israel and Palestine? That's after the break. So I know that you put these allegations to Meta of targeting employees for their pro-Palestine advocacy, of over-enforcing these policies when it comes to content about or from Palestine, of double standards in general. What did they say? How did they respond?
For the most part, the responses that we got from Meta were kind of canned corporate responses. When it came to allegations made by Saima and others that, they couldn't speak out freely, they repeated, our goal is to foster a company culture of mutual respect and inclusivity. When we asked them about Omar's case, they declined to comment, presumably because it's pending litigation. What we found most interesting is what they did not comment on. So one of the things we raised to them is that many Meta employees were really hurt by the fact that after October 7th, senior leadership sent their condolences to Israeli employees and made that clear and posted about it internally and publicly. But when it came to Palestinian employees, many of whom lost multiple family members in the war on Gaza, there was no such messaging and there was no such sympathy conveyed to them. When we raised that to them, that they failed to fully acknowledge the grief of their Palestinian employees, the response was, decline comment here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And this is something too, Malika, that really affected the morale of so many of the Meta workers that we spoke to. I mean, they were witnessing their colleagues just falling apart, losing multiple family members in Gaza. And even if you just wanted to post internally sympathy or condolences, you were not allowed to. And, as for example, we talked to Ramzi, who's a Palestinian-American data analyst.
It's been really difficult. I've been challenged, depressed and anxious, debating, what does this company come to?
And he told me that tomorrow's my last day at Meta. I just can't take it anymore.
Dena, we've talked about the experiences of employees inside Meta, but you also looked into where these policies that they say they're facing are coming from. And what did you find?
We found that there are a lot of senior leaders in Meta who have ties to Israel or Israeli causes. So I spoke to a tech expert named Paul Bigger, who really helped map this out for me. He told me that one of the most senior guys at Meta is somebody named Guy Rosen. Guy Rosen is the company's chief information security officer. And prior to that, he was the vice president of product management, where he helped build Facebook's content moderation tools. But before all of that, he served in the Israeli military's elite unit 8200. That's the secretive cyber intelligence group that is infamous for spying on Palestinians under occupation.
Unit 8200's operators are always watching, but at a distance from those they target. In Tel Aviv, where they're removed from the consequences of the work they do. But surveillance and intimidation of Palestinians is often more personal.
In our own analysis of LinkedIn data, we found dozens of other current Meta employees who once served in Unit 8200 as well, and even more who had previously worked at Meta and were in Unit 8200. So that's just the military side. We also found Meta employees who have direct ties to the Israeli government. Jordana Cutler is the company's public policy director for Israel and the Jewish diaspora. That's a position, by the way, that does not have a Palestinian counterpart. Jordana Cutler was previously an advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Before that, she worked at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. And she gave an interview in 2020, I believe, to an Israeli outlet.
Inside the company, part of my job is to be a representative for the people here in Israel, the voice of the government for their concerns. I have an opportunity to really influence the way that we look at policy.
And, there are other senior figures with Israeli ties that we detail in the documentary. But the one last thing I would point out is that, we discovered that Israel has an agency called the Israeli Cyber Unit that was established in 2015. The Israeli Cyber Unit's goal is to petition social media companies around the world to remove content that they say incites violence or promotes terrorism. And in many cases, these companies comply and remove an overwhelming majority of that content. And most of the requests do, in fact, go to Meta. And I think that's concerning that social media companies are moderating their content at the behest of a foreign government. And the implications of that, I think, are troubling.
You detailed some of the names that are in leadership positions, and I'm wondering how far up this goes. What about Mark Zuckerberg?
What we discovered about Mark Zuckerberg was that after October 7th, he gave a donation of $125,000 to Zaka. Zaka is the Israeli search and rescue organization that was responsible for perpetuating the infamous beheaded baby fly. We also, when we want to talk about the faces of the company, Sheryl Sandberg, longtime former COO, she's no longer at the company, but she was on the board of Meta. She recently fronted a documentary that claims that there was a mass campaign of sexual assault on Israeli women on October 7th. This is a claim that continues to have little evidence behind it, but it definitely has been used to drum up support for and justify Israel's assault on Gaza. And what someone like Paul Bigger, the tech expert that we spoke to in the documentary, says is that, the influence of Sheryl Sandberg is obviously going to trickle down throughout the company in terms of who's employed, what the policies are and such.
Why is what happens at a place like Meta important for the public to know about? Because at first glance, it can seem like this is a very niche conversation, a niche concern for people, these tech companies in fancy places in the US. But are there consequences to what's happening behind the scenes at a company like Meta that impact policy or public perception when it comes to Israel, Palestine, or Israel's war in Gaza?
Yeah, I think it's very important for the public to understand. Social media is the primary method through which a lot of news gets disseminated. And when we're talking about Gaza specifically, let's keep in mind that Israel, since the war started, has banned foreign journalists from going in there to report. So, people are depending on journalists, photojournalists like Mu'taz Azaiza and others to be the eyes and ears and to uncover the truth about what's happening in this genocide. Meta is the biggest social media company in the world, so it has a real impact on how people understand what's happening. I think the stakes are really high because if what's happening in Gaza is being suppressed and censored, that's contributing to the cover-up of this genocide. When a video or when images get taken down as sexual content or nudity, that reduces the visibility. It reduces outrage. It prevents people from fully being able to mobilize, and it blunts social movements. So I think the implications are incredibly serious and alarming.
And that's The Take. Have any of your Palestine-related posts been censored on Facebook or Instagram? Let us know in the comments below. Also, if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist. That's where you'll find all of our recent content updated regularly so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. See you tomorrow.